My name is Connor, and I suffer from an affliction known as sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis episodes are actually fairly common among a lot of adults, and are generally of little concern as far as a medical condition. There are no known methods of treatment, and most people usually only have 1 or 2 episodes a year, if that. I, on the other hand, am not so lucky. I am one of the 5% of sleep paralysis sufferers that experiences an episode multiple times a week. In case you are fortunate enough never to have experienced sleep paralysis yourself, I'll try to explain it to the best of my ability. Unfortunately, when explained to someone who has never experienced an episode themselves, the symptoms can sometimes sound like downright hysteria. But I digress. Sleep paralysis is a state, during wake-up or falling asleep, in which a person is mentally aware, but physically unable to move or speak. During an episode, you might typically hallucinate, and hear, feel, or see things that are not there. Depending on the hallucination, this can be one of the most terrifying experiences of your life. Episodes generally last less than a couple of minutes in reality, but to the afflicted, it can feel like hours. Sleep paralysis isn't a new phenomenon either. In fact, sleep paralysis has been described throughout history for thousands of years. One of the most common hallucinations, the night hag, is a generic name for a folkloric creature found in cultures around the world, and is commonly used to explain the phenomenon of sleep paralysis. The general description is that a person feels the presence of a supernatural malevolent immobilizing them, as if sitting on their chest. Some scientists have suggested sleep paralysis as an explanation for reports of paranormal phenomena, such as ghost encounters, alien abductions, demons or demonic possession, the infamous night hag sightings, and shadow people hauntings as well. If nothing else, my personal hallucinations always vary from episode to episode, so it's never a boring experience. Some people are plagued by the same visions night after night, but I guess as revenge for trying to outsmart it, my brain likes to keep the horrors fresh and diverse to keep me on my toes. The episode started when I was about 12 years old. I was a foster kid being bounced around from group home to group home. Because of the rocky start I had in life, I had a lot of behavioral problems, and found myself getting kicked out of every new house shortly after my arrival. Things were turbulent for me, and I was frequently under a lot of stress and anxiety because of the situation I was in. I didn't sleep much at all when I would arrive in the new homes, and it was one night shortly after arriving in the worst group home of all that I would have my very first episode of sleep paralysis. I had been shown my room earlier that day by the woman who ran the group home. I was sleeping in the bottom bunk in a 2-bunk bed bedroom, along with 2 other boys my age. Fortunately for me, the kid who was supposed to use the bunk above mine hadn't arrived just yet, so I didn't have to worry about him snoring or keeping me up that night. I was already on edge being in a new environment, and I was extra anxious due to a brief altercation I had earlier in the day with my caseworker. I tossed and turned for a while until eventually I heard the soft snoring from the other 2 boys, coming from the bunk bed parallel to mine. They had been chatting with each other for what felt like an eternity, so I was grateful when they finally passed out, and I could enjoy the peace and some semblance of quiet. I rolled over onto my back and closed my eyes. Even then, I liked to sleep on my back because it felt like no one could sneak up on me, or get the jump on me in any way. I felt myself dozing off, when suddenly, the sound of a thud happened on the bunk directly above me, followed by the sound of squeaking springs, as if someone was shifting their weight across the mattress. My eyes shot open, staring straight ahead at the bunk above. My mind raced as I second-guessed myself. Didn't the woman I spoke with earlier tell me that no one was going to be using that bunk for a while? Surely I would have noticed someone climbing up there, I thought to myself. Slowly but surely, I heard the sound of springs inside the mattress above me creaking, moving closer to the edge of the bed. Whoever was up there was either trying to come down or was about to lean over the edge to strike up a conversation. I wasn't particularly interested in either. That's when I saw the long, spindly fingers slither down from over the edge of the top bunk and curl themselves into the wood above me. Pulling down after them was a wide, gray, hideous face with black beady eyes and a disturbingly wide ear-to-ear grin. I could feel sweat beading on my face, and I tensed my body to roll off the bed and run. That's when I came to the horrifying realization that I could neither move my arms nor my legs. I could only stare in abject terror at the horrifying monstrosity above me. I opened my mouth to scream for the other boys in the room, unleashing every ounce of sound I could muster from my adolescent lungs. I screamed and screamed as the creature and its hideous grin descended down towards me. But nobody came to save me. Eventually, I blacked out, I assume from the terror of what was happening. I awoke the next morning safely in my bed, lying on my back, exactly as I had fallen asleep. Remembering the night before, I quickly sat up and looked over to the boys lying in the bunk across from mine, making sure they hadn't been massacred by whatever demon creature had been in here with us the night before. Both of them were awake and unharmed, hanging out on their beds and talking to one another about their plans for the day. Shaken, I asked them how they didn't hear me screaming for them the night before. One of them shrugged, and the other shook his head and confirmed that I hadn't made a sound all night. One of the boys even said he had gotten up shortly after falling asleep to use the bathroom, and I was dead asleep the entire time. These episodes would continue, but it wasn't until I was an adult living in my own apartment that I would finally have a medical professional explain sleep paralysis to me. Until then, I simply thought that maybe my hallucinations were some kind of paranormal psychic connection to the supernatural, or possibly the symptom of an underlying repressed trauma that I needed to work out. Either way, finding out that there was a name for what I was experiencing was a huge weight off my shoulders, and allowed me to deal with each episode a little better every time they would come along. I can now generally identify when an episode is beginning, and better prepare myself mentally for whatever hallucination I might be forced to deal with. Recently, I moved into a small house with my wife in a quiet little suburb closer to my office. My wife and I were both children of the foster system, so we can be a little overprotective when it comes to our security. Shortly after moving in, we installed security cameras in both the master bedroom and the living room to give us some peace of mind when we get called away for business. On one particular occasion, my wife had been called out of town for a conference over the weekend, leaving me to fend for myself at home. The week I had at work was incredibly stressful, so after coming home on a Friday evening, I took a quick shower and hopped straight into bed. Maybe minutes after drifting off, I began to feel that eerie sensation creeping down my spine. I had experienced it enough to recognize the phantom feeling of being watched. I heaved a deep sigh and prepared myself for whatever hallucination this episode might bring me. On nights like that one where I'm particularly exhausted, I tend to keep my eyes shut during the event and just ride out the horrific auditory hallucinations that might come my way. Sometimes it's the sound of screaming. Sometimes it's growling noises from some unseen monster in the darkness. That night, it was only footsteps, then some rummaging, then the sound of the bedroom door latch clicking shut. It wasn't unusual for an episode to involve some kind of intruder who would let themselves in, poke around a bit, and then leave. Not only did I not pay it a second thought, I never even opened my eyes before drifting right back off to sleep. The weekend passed without me ever thinking about the episode a few nights before, and Sunday evening arrived before I knew it. My wife arrived home and I greeted her before heading off to the office to get an early start on some spreadsheets that my boss would be expecting on his desk the next morning. When I arrived home, my wife called me into the other room and told me to look at her laptop right away. My stomach sank as I saw the color drain from my wife's face, as she asked me if I had checked the security tape from the night she had been gone. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened, so I told her that I hadn't had a reason to. She wordlessly turned the laptop to face me, and I watched a time lapse of that Friday evening begin to play back. Around 15 minutes after I arrived home, shortly after I had gotten into the shower, the figure of a man wearing a ski mask and all black clothing opened the door to the bedroom and began to look around the room for valuables. He seems to hear the shower turning off and shuffles over to the open closet on the other side of the room. I lie down to go to sleep, and shortly after, the masked man quietly re-enters from the closet, checking the dressers for valuables before leaving and shutting the door behind him. We immediately called the police and searched around the house for anything that might have been taken. A few forgettable odds and ends appeared to be missing, but otherwise nothing else worth mentioning. After reviewing the same footage from the perspective of the living room camera, it's clear to see that in my stressed out haze, I had forgotten to arm the alarm system behind me after coming home from work. The intruder came in through the garage door, which we usually leave unlocked out of habit. I consider myself lucky that I wasn't seriously hurt or even killed, but one thing is for certain. I will never be able to dismiss an episode of sleep paralysis ever again.